Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're going on another deep dive today. And
Oh, this is going to be a fun one.
yeah, this one's really interesting. We're going to be exploring these different states of self that we all experience.
Right.
And we're looking at the work of psychoanalyst Juha Klaavu.
Mm-hmm.
And he builds upon psychiatrist Jormateki's self-state theory.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that even though this was developed working with patients with borderline personality disorder,
Okay.
Klaavu suggests these dynamics apply to all of us.
Oh, wow.
So it doesn't really matter what your mental health background is.
Okay.
These different selves are at play.
Yeah, yeah. That's really fascinating. So
Yeah.
how would you break down these different types of selves?
Well, he describes three main types: the true self,
Right.
the basic self,
Okay.
and then what he calls chaotic selves.
Ooh, that sounds interesting.
So let's start with the true self.
Okay.
And you can think of that as our most authentic essence.
The core of who we are, completely stripped of all the external pressures and influences.
So, is that even possible? I mean, is
Yeah.
that something that's achievable to actually get to that kind of pure, unadulterated self?
It's not really about reaching some perfect state of enlightenment or anything.
Yeah, okay.
It's more about a process
Okay.
of psychological separation from our parents,
Oh, interesting.
establishing healthy boundaries.
Yeah.
And that allows for genuine empathy
Yeah.
and balanced relationships.
It's okay. So you're not saying cut your parents off or anything, but just kind of recognizing that influence and making your own choices as an adult.
Yeah, and I mean, ideally, that kind of separation allows you to see others as subjects, not just objects to fulfill your needs.
Right, yeah.
So you can really connect with people as individuals when you're not relying on them for validation or trying to fit their mold or something.
Okay, so what about this basic self? It sounds like it's not quite as idealistic as the true self.
Right. The basic self is more of a blend. It's where our true self mixes with those external influences
Yeah,
and some of the inauthentic aspects we pick up along the way.
I see.
It's really just who we are in our everyday lives, navigating the world, interacting with other people.
And I imagine that basic self looks different for everyone depending on their experiences.
Absolutely. Someone with a stable, supportive upbringing
Right.
might have a basic self that's pretty close to their true self.
Yeah, okay.
But for someone who's experienced significant trauma or difficult relationships, those experiences will probably have a stronger influence on their basic self.
Yeah, it seems like the key difference is how much those external factors have shaped the way that we interact with the world.
Right.
And Klavu even mentions this idea of a functional self,
Yeah.
where people just stay constantly busy
Yeah.
to avoid uncomfortable emotions.
Yeah, that resonates with me. Have you ever noticed yourself doing that?
Yeah, for sure. Like the pressure to keep busy and to be productive all the time. But sometimes it feels like it's just a way of avoiding having to slow down and deal with things.
Precisely. It's
Yeah.
like we're afraid of what might surface
Yeah,
if we actually allow ourselves to just be.
for sure. And I guess that's where these chaotic selves come into play.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, the basic self is our everyday persona,
Okay.
but sometimes deeper, more reactive parts of ourselves emerge,
Okay, yeah.
especially when we're triggered by difficult experiences.
I see.
And these are what Klavu calls chaotic selves.
Chaotic selves.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and those can be a bit messier to unpack.
Yeah, chaotic selves definitely sounds a little ominous. What exactly are those more reactive parts of ourselves?
Well, you can think of them as almost like mini personalities
Okay.
that are formed in response to difficult experiences,
Okay.
especially relational trauma.
Hmm.
It's like different parts of us holding on to those past hurts
I see.
and trying to protect us in the present, even if their methods aren't always super helpful.
Right.
And actually, Carl Jung, you know, famous psychologist,
Yeah.
observed something really similar, and he called them autonomic complexes.
Okay, autonomic complexes.
Mm.
Interesting. So it's like those past experiences actually create separate selves within us.
Well, they're not fully separate entities,
Right.
but they can definitely feel that way sometimes
Yeah.
because they can have us, as Jung put it.
Oh, wow.
They hijack our thoughts and behaviors in certain situations,
Mhm.
especially when we're feeling triggered or vulnerable.
Okay, and Klavu divides these chaotic selves into two main categories.
Right.
Victimized self-states
Uh-huh.
and oppressive self-states.
Exactly. So let's start with victimized self-states.
Okay.
Imagine a child who has been repeatedly subjugated or ignored or mistreated.
Yeah.
They grow up with this deep sense of being powerless,
Right.
always the victim.
Mm-hmm.
And as adults, Those victimized self states are constantly unconsciously seeking those missing emotional experiences.
Oh, okay.
That reparation for past hurts they never received.
I see, yeah.
It's really a way of trying to get their needs met, even if it's through these sort of unhealthy patterns.
So they're always looking for something from others to fill that void.
Right. And the tricky thing is that no amount of external validation can truly satisfy that inner emptiness.
Right, yeah. That makes sense. It sounds like a recipe for frustration on everyone's part.
You hit the nail on the head. It's like pouring water into a leaky bucket.
Yeah,
And that's where those unhealthy patterns come in.
right.
So instead of taking responsibility for their own happiness,
Yeah.
they might blame others for their problems. They might avoid challenging situations or
Yeah,
even sabotage their own success.
I see.
They might also feel very intense envy towards people who seem to have it all figured out.
Right, yeah. That makes sense. So it sounds like someone operating from that victimized self state might become manipulative or passive aggressive, even if they don't realize they're doing it.
Exactly. They might guilt trip other people into taking care of them,
Yeah.
or they might play the martyr to get sympathy and attention. Right.
It's not always intentional,
I see.
but it can definitely create a lot of resentment and tension in relationships.
Yeah, for sure. And it sounds exhausting for everyone involved.
Yeah.
So what about the oppressive self-state? How does that tend to play out?
Well, imagine someone who always needs to be right,
Yeah,
or who micromanages every detail,
right.
or who has a lot of difficulty seeing things from other people's perspective.
Okay.
That's the oppressive self-state in action.
So it's not just about being a bully or anything. It's more about this need for control over their environment.
Exactly. It's like they're constantly on guard, trying to protect themselves from
Yeah.
feeling vulnerable or out of control.
Okay.
And that can manifest in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
Dominating conversations,
Right.
dismissing other people's feelings,
Right.
needing to have the last word in every argument.
Yeah, I imagine that can be really isolating for the people around them. It doesn't leave a lot of room for connection. Yeah. And remember, those two states, the victimized and the oppressive, often attract and activate each other in relationships.
Right. It's that toxic tango we talked about where they just play into each other.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Let's say one partner tends to withdraw and avoid conflict.
Yeah.
They're kind of operating from that victimized self state.
Okay.
And that might trigger the other partner's need for control, activating that oppressive self state.
Okay.
And they might start making demands,
Yeah. Yeah.
trying to force connection,
Okay.
becoming overly critical,
Mhm.
which just pushes the first partner further away.
It seems like the key is to recognize those patterns before they escalate into full-blown conflict. But how do you actually do that? I mean, it's not like you're walking around thinking, okay, now I'm feeling victimized, time to play the martyr.
Right. Well, that's the beauty of this framework.
Okay.
It's not about labeling ourselves or other people,
Right.
but it's about developing a deeper awareness of our own emotional patterns.
So it's more about noticing those moments when you feel triggered or reactive or like you're falling into old familiar ways of behaving.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about asking yourself, what am I feeling right now?
Yeah.
What need am I trying to get met?
Right.
Is this behavior actually serving me? Or is it just perpetuating a cycle of pain and frustration?
That's a really helpful way to frame it. It's not about judging yourself, but more about understanding where that behavior is coming from.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
like becoming a detective of your own inner world,
Yeah.
uncovering those hidden motivations and those patterns that are driving your actions.
Okay, I like that. And once we start to understand those patterns, we can start to make different choices, right?
Exactly.
So instead of just reacting automatically from that place of hurt or fear, we can pause and say, is this how I would want to respond?
Beautifully put. It's about aligning your actions with your deepest values and desires,
Yeah.
rather than letting those old reactive patterns dictate your behavior.
This is starting to feel really empowering, but I'm guessing this kind of self-awareness takes time and practice.
Absolutely. It's a journey.
Yeah.
It's not a destination,
Yeah.
and it's a journey that's worth taking. Just imagine the possibilities if we could all interact from a place of authenticity and empathy and genuine connection.
That would be amazing. But how realistic is that, really? It seems like we're constantly being bombarded with messages and societal pressures that just kind of push us away from that true self.
It's definitely a challenge, especially in our fast-paced, highly connected world.
Right.
But I think it's a challenge worth embracing.
Okay.
Even small shifts in awareness can have a ripple effect on our relationships and our overall well-being.
That's encouraging. So where do we go from here? What are some practical steps we can take to start cultivating more of that true self in our everyday lives.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's start with that victimized self state.
Okay.
And remember, at its core,
Yeah.
it's really all about unconsciously seeking what was missed in childhood, whether that's love, attention, validation,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe even just basic needs.
Right. Yeah.
It's that deep-seated longing for a sense of completion,
Yeah.
that reparation for past hurts that were never addressed.
So they're always trying to get something from others to fill that void.
Yeah, and you said earlier that no amount of external validation can really satisfy that inner emptiness.
Right.
It seems like a recipe for frustration for everyone
It
involved.
really does. Yeah, it's like pouring water into a leaky bucket.
You hit the nail on the head.
And that's where those unhealthy patterns come in.
Right. So instead of taking responsibility for their own happiness,
Yeah.
they might blame others for their problems,
Yeah.
avoid challenging situations,
Right.
or even sabotage their own success.
Wow. Yeah.
And they might also feel very intense envy towards those people who seem to have it all figured out.
Yeah, so it sounds like someone who's operating from that victimized self-state might become passive-aggressive or manipulative,
Right.
even if they don't even realize they're doing it.
Exactly. They might guilt trip other people into taking care of them.
Right.
Or play the martyr to get sympathy and attention.
Yeah.
It's not always intentional,
Right.
but it can really create a lot of resentment and tension in relationships.
Yeah, for sure. And it sounds exhausting to be on either side of that. What about the oppressive self-state? How does that one usually play out in everyday life?
Well, imagine someone who, always needs to be right,
Okay. Yeah.
or who, micromanages every detail,
Right.
or has a really hard time seeing things from other people's perspectives.
Yeah.
That's the oppressive self-state in action.
So it's not necessarily about being a bully.
Right.
It's more about a lack of empathy and that need to control everything.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It's like they're constantly on guard trying to protect themselves from feeling vulnerable or out of control.
Yeah.
And that can manifest in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
Dominating conversations,
Right.
dismissing other people's feelings,
Yeah.
needing to have the last word in every argument.
Right. It doesn't really leave much space for genuine connection.
Exactly. And remember,
Yeah.
these two states, the victimized and the oppressive,
Yeah.
often attract and activate each other in relationships.
Right. It's that toxic tango that we talked about,
Exactly.
where each partner is unconsciously playing into the other one's unhealthy patterns.
Exactly. So let's say, for example, one partner tends to withdraw and avoid conflict.
Okay.
They're kind of operating from that victimized self state.
Yeah.
And that might trigger the other partner's need for control,
Right.
activating their oppressive self state.
Oh, okay.
And they might start, making demands,
Right.
trying to force connection,
Yeah.
or becoming overly critical,
Yeah.
which of course just pushes that first partner further away.
It seems like the key is recognizing those patterns before they escalate into a huge conflict.
Right.
But how do you actually do that? It's not like we're walking around thinking, okay, I'm feeling victimized right now, time to play the martyr.
Right. And that's the beauty of this framework.
Okay.
It's not about labeling ourselves or other people.
Right.
It's more about developing this deeper awareness of our own emotional patterns.
So it's about noticing when you feel triggered or reactive or like you're falling into these familiar but maybe not so healthy ways of behaving.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about taking a moment to ask yourself, what am I feeling right now?
Yeah.
What need am I trying to get met?
Right.
Is this behavior really serving me, or is it just perpetuating this cycle of pain and frustration?
Yeah, that's a really helpful way to think about it. It's not about judging yourself. It's more about understanding where those behaviors are coming from.
Exactly. It's like becoming a detective of your own inner world,
I like that.
uncovering those hidden motivations
Yeah.
and the patterns that are driving your actions.
And once we start to understand those patterns, then we can start to make different choices, right?
Exactly.
So instead of just reacting automatically from that place of hurt or fear,
Right.
you can pause and ask yourself, okay, is this really how I want to respond?
Beautifully put. It's really about aligning your actions with your deepest values and desires,
Yeah.
rather than just letting those old reactive patterns run the show.
This is starting to feel really empowering, but I'm guessing that this kind of self-awareness takes time and practice.
Oh, absolutely. It's a journey, not a destination.
Yeah.
And it's a journey that's worth taking. Just imagine the possibilities if we could all interact from a place of authenticity,
Yeah.
empathy, and genuine encosham.
That would be amazing. But how realistic is that, really? It seems like we're constantly bombarded with messages and societal pressures that push us away from that true self?
It's definitely a challenge,
Yeah.
especially in our fast-paced, highly connected world.
Right.
But I think it's a challenge worth embracing.
Okay.
Even small shifts in awareness can have a ripple effect
Yeah.
on our relationships and our
Yeah.
overall well-being.
That's encouraging. So where do we go from here? What are some practical steps that people can take to start cultivating more of that true self?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah. How do we move from just understanding these concepts to actually embodying them? Like,
Right.
what are some things we can do to cultivate that true self?
Well, it all starts with awareness.
Right.
We've talked about paying attention to those moments when we feel triggered
Yeah.
or reactive, those times when our chaotic selves are like trying to take over.
Right. Yeah.
But it also involves kind of stepping back and recognizing the patterns in our relationships.
Okay.
How do we typically interact with our partners, our friends, our family members?
Yeah.
Are there recurring conflicts or dynamics
Yeah.
that might be fueled by these unconscious patterns?
I'm already kind of thinking about some of my own relationships
Yeah.
and wondering if maybe some of those times where I feel resentful or misunderstood
Mhm.
could be connected to these victimized or oppressive self states. It's definitely giving me a new perspective.
Yeah, I mean, once you start to see those patterns,
Right.
you can start to make different choices.
That-
So maybe instead of withdrawing or getting defensive,
Yeah.
you can communicate your needs more directly.
Yeah.
Or maybe you can practice setting boundaries
Okay.
with people who tend to activate those more like reactive parts of yourself.
Setting boundaries. Yeah. That seems like a really important part of this whole thing. It's about recognizing you don't have to play those old roles anymore. Right?
Exactly. It's about
Yeah.
reclaiming your power
Yeah.
and choosing to show up in a way that really aligns with your true self.
Yeah, I like that. So that might mean saying no to things that you don't want to do,
Right.
even if it means disappointing someone.
Yeah.
It could mean having some tough conversations
Mhm.
to address those imbalances in your relationships.
Yeah, sometimes it even means walking away from relationships that are no longer serving your growth.
That's hard. But it sounds really liberating, too. What about
Oh.
those times when you do slip back into those old patterns?
Oh, absolutely. That's going to happen. We're human.
Yeah.
This isn't about being perfect.
Right.
It's about progress, not perfection.
Okay.
The key is to be kind to ourselves when we mess up.
Yeah.
So instead of beating ourselves up, we can just acknowledge the pattern
Right.
and ask ourselves, okay, what can I learn from this?
Yeah.
What triggered this reaction?
Yeah.
What need was I trying to get met?
Yeah.
How can I do this differently next time?
It's like we're constantly refining our understanding of ourselves
Yeah.
and learning how to navigate the world from a more authentic place.
Exactly. And remember, this journey of self-discovery can be so rewarding
Yeah.
because as we shed those old reactive patterns,
Hmm.
we create space for more genuine connection, deeper intimacy,
Hmm.
and a greater sense of fulfillment in our lives.
Yeah, for sure.
Mhm.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation.
Good. I'm
It
glad.
feels like I have this whole new toolkit now for understanding myself and my relationships.
Good.
So any final thoughts for our listeners as they kind of embark on their own journeys of self-discovery?
Yeah, I would just encourage everyone to approach this with a sense of curiosity and compassion.
Okay.
Be gentle with yourself as you uncover these different parts of yourself.
Right.
And remember, you are not alone in this journey. We all have these different selves within us.
Yeah.
And learning to navigate them is a lifelong process.
Yeah, it really is.
But with awareness, intention, and a willingness to grow, we can all move toward a more authentic and fulfilling way of being.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today.
My pleasure.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the complexities of the human psyche.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everyone.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep growing, and keep embracing the beauty of your true self.